certain politicians, such as President Trump, in the past have issued executive orders trying to solidify freedom of speech on college campuses, for instance. Do you think that President Trump's policy and what he engaged in back in, I think he did this in 2019, 2020, was effective? Was it not effective? What would you do to try to ease those tensions, those cultural tensions that are happening around the country, and to promote a culture of freedom of speech and open debate in our institutions and on our campuses?
Yeah, I don't think campus tensions were magically diffused when Trump was president. So I don't think the steps that he took necessarily really made things that much better. Honestly, Trump just on his own is a very caustic person, has created further hyperpartisanship and polarization just in the way he goes about politics, how he is always on attack mode. And so I think actually he's kind of made discourse even harder because it's put everybody back into their corners and really made them much more angry at one another. Whereas I'm going to listen to anybody's point of view. I believe any point of view is valid to be able to be heard under freedom of speech. Doesn't mean I'm going to associate with it or agree with it or think that it's a great idea. But I can't be afraid of alternative ideas. Just as I'm here as somebody who has a faith tradition for Liberty podcasts, right? I'm not somebody who has to be afraid of having my ideas challenged. I'm somebody who is comfortable saying, hey, I'm happy with people who think all different kinds of way differently than me. Discourse with anybody else, so long as there's mutual respect and just agree upon, respect for one another to have a civil discourse with one another. In instances where things get inflamed and tensions, people still have freedom to speak with passion and with anger and all sorts of horrible things that maybe don't work the best to have a constructive conversation. But they still have the right to have those conversations. They still have the right to speak the way they want to speak to it. I would argue that's probably not the best way to build a movement sometimes. But for me, I want discourse to be completely open. Because if it isn't, that implies that I am afraid to let my ideas be challenged. That implies that, I have to say, well, if we hear something else, then God forbid, or no, God forbid, rather, right? Somebody hears an idea that might challenge the way I think or views in politics. I have to be comfortable being in a room with people who disagree with me all the time. I go to state fairs, right? Not everybody who approaches the booth is a libertarian. Many times there are people who are ready to challenge libertarians and to challenge their way of thinking. And I have to be happy to have that opportunity to challenge them back. Otherwise, what are we doing here? If we only listen to the speech with which we agree, are we really learning anything? Are we really taking the opportunity to really hear things that might challenge our own way of thinking, that might sharpen our own ways of having discourse? Honestly, all of that stuff is critical to becoming a lifelong learner. And I think universities are at a disservice when they remove people from being able to be heard.
Do you think that President Biden has been also doing a bad job pertaining to the protection of free speech on our campuses and in our institutions?
Yeah, well, not to use Trump's moniker, but I feel like Biden's been very much asleep at the wheel with listening to students and with listening to what's going on in college campuses, both in regards to free speech and also in regards to foreign policy and war and peace, which is the most recent tensions that are happening on our colleges across the country. Much of that due to religious strife and religious, violence amongst parties who have deep, long-held divisions amongst one another. And we call for peace because these are people of faith, but because these are people, and we want to see people stop killing each other. And so, I think Biden's not been very great either. There's been so many areas where just Biden hasn't even addressed the issue because he either hasn't taken the time, he hasn't taken the notice, or he's more concerned with, trying to win his reelection.